Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started now. My name is Colin Glover. I work in the audit and advisory portion here at Sera-Brynn out of Suffolk, Virginia. And also on the phone today is Sam Morthland, who runs our Federal Services Division. Today, we came out with version 0.7 last week. It stayed a different date, but we got to see it last week. And we're really going to focus on the difference between .6 and .7 of CMMC. And .7 really focuses on those levels 4 and 5 controls. There's some other differences we'll discuss. So, getting started. All right, just to recap, everybody knows, and we'll go through this quickly, CMMC is due to come out next summer for implementation. How is that going to look? We're not wholly sure yet how everybody's going to be affected. Eventually, according to the DoD, Department of Defense, all 300,000 members of the Defense Industrial Base will have to be at some certain level of cybersecurity maturity model certification, levels 1 through 5. CMMC makes use of NIST 800-171. It increases some requirements at level 3, and there are some changes and variations. This is in addition to the DFARS Rule 252.204-7012. Of note, and I haven't seen too much on it yet, but the Defense Contracts Management Agency, DCMA, may still continue to do audits under 7012 and 171. That's going to be something we'll be watching carefully as CMMC rolls out. All right. Again, who's subject to it? Everybody's subject to it, from the major primes all the way down the supply chain. If you're only making products for the DoD or offering various services, there is still going to be some requirements for you. You may be at that level 1 if you're not handling CUI, but you will be subject to it. At levels 4 and 5, again, those are going to be sensitive programs and to be further defined. Again, you've hopefully have seen this slide before. If not, quickly. Level 1 is some basic cybersecurity requirements. Those tend to come from the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which came out several years ago. And it's having things like firewalls and the basics, having access control. Level 2, who is subject to level 2, we're not sure. Level 2 is not going to have controlled unclassified information. It's going to be people that have some more level of sensitive information than just level 1 holders. Level 3, where the vast majority of companies are probably going to sit, at least ones that are used to it at this point. If you hold controlled unclassified information, you're going to be at that level 2 and 3. A key here on the maturity side is activities reviewed for adherence. You have to go through security control assessments and ensure that you're meeting the standards. Level 4, you have a fairly sophisticated and mature cybersecurity program. Level 5, you're going to defend yourself against APTs, advanced persistent threats. Also at level 5, you're hitting some of those ISO standards where you're seeking to improve your processes and maturities. Sam just sent me this slide a couple minutes ago. I managed to work it in. This will be the first time I'm really looking at this slide either. This came from the DoD this morning, so I thought it would be good to drop this in here. This is the CMMC implementation flow, as you can read. So right now, we're over on the left. They're developing that accreditation body requirements. I've been following the accreditation body conversations fairly closely. It looks like they're trying to get an MOU to DoD, Department of Defense, a memorandum of understanding to the Department of Defense in January to set up the accreditation body. The accreditation body is going to be the body which will certify the auditors. That's really their job, and they're going to hold the certifications for contractors. The actual RFI dates are still to be determined to a certain extent. If you see down in the bottom left corner, it looks like they're going to have a marketplace for certifiers as their goal, where the company can select their auditing organization. Then certifier conducts a certification, and then you get to bid on that RFP. There's the go, no-go selection and award. This is a pretty interesting slide, and hopefully they'll continue to flesh it out as we move forward. The CMMC certificate database, I know that's concerning to a lot of companies. How is that going to be addressed? I'm not sure yet. And then for those that are having questions, I think Sam is going to try to address these once we get to the end. So we'll make sure and answer all your questions. And if you want to drop them in the Q&A section or the chat, please do so. Again, this slide recently came across and decided to drop it in. Right now, starting at the bottom, all development, we're at .7. Version 1.0 is still due in January. Assessment guidance, there's some of the drafts. Hopefully, oh boy, we're going to see the level 1, 2, and 3 guides coming out in January, level 4 and 5 in March. Training is supposed to begin in March, I believe, for the certifiers, and then, or maybe even January, and level 4 and 5 will be in March going forward. And then the accreditation body is supposed to be established in January. Accreditations for certifiers will begin in March, it appears. There'll be a marketplace, and then beginning certifications in the May-June timeframe. And at the DoD level, the CMMC database will be stood up in May, and the CMMC request for information will be released in June. They're still moving along this timeline. This is their goal. All right, like I said, version .6 came out in November. We're at version .7, which came out last week. The major change between .6 and .7 is .6 only addressed levels 1 through 3, and .7 is addressing levels 4 and 5. For the majority of contractors, you're going to be at levels 1 through 3. If you hold CUI, you're going to be at 3. If you don't hold CUI, you're going to be at level 1 and 2. Levels 4 and 5 really are for specific programs and have some advanced cybersecurity techniques. That being said, and I think I'll say it again later, is a lot of these techniques at 4 and 5 are good, and if you can incorporate into your program, you're certainly recommended to do so. 1 through 3, levels 1 through 3 are generally based on 800-171 revision 1. There were about 21 additional controls put in there from CMMC. Levels 4 and 5 are a combination of 171B, the critical security controls from Center for Internet Security, CIS. There's some CMMC specified ones, and there are a handful of other frameworks referenced in there. So not from 171. If you go back and if you had looked at 171B previously, it had some fairly esoteric and difficult controls. A lot of those were not included in CMMC. So I think a lot of people are pleased with that. All right. Level 1 is the FAR, level 3 is 171 plus a couple other. Levels 4 and 5 are more advanced. I believe there's somewhere on the order of 42 or 43 4 and 5 controls. So level 4, you're doing well. If you get up to level 4, you're going to be fairly secure. You have the capability to adapt to address the changing tactics, TTP, of an advanced persistent threat. Level 5, you've put some serious resources behind your security program. You have the capability to repel APTs, and that's a pretty big deal. It is the totality of controls that does this. You can't just put in level 5 until you're good. It's a ramp up from level 1 all the way up to level 5. There's 42 controls at levels 4 and 5. In general, there are enhancements, some tweaks or some enhancements to the control, but there are several that are new and may be expensive to implement. The controls come from the various families: access control, asset management, training, configuration management, incident response, recovery, risk management, all those good ones. Systems and communications protection and incident response and risk management is where a big portion of those controls came from. To blind people, and to just give you an idea of what we're looking at, these are the controls from level 4 from .7. These controls may change over the course of the next couple of months. There may be some additions or changes. This is all still draft. Again, these are the level 4 controls. If you go to the actual document itself, the draft document, which is off of the DoD CMMC website, you can look at it. They do a pretty good job, and as you can see in the right column on this, indicates where this control came from. Several of them comes from 171B. You have some CMMC defined ones. The Center for Internet Security, critical security controls are on there, as well from the cybersecurity framework. Supply chain risks are going to be a big one, and I think that's really going to fit in amongst this whole program, is managing that supply chain, both up and down. All right. Level 5 controls, again, this is the top tier. As you can see, they brought in some ISO controls. They brought, more 171 and CMMC, and critical security controls. Enforce port and protocol compliance, that would be a big one. So there's some fairly interesting ones in here. Because that's difficult to read, and again, you can go and read it for yourself. I pulled out a handful of controls that I thought were worth talking about. As I mentioned, several are enhancements to existing controls. If you look at 171, you're supposed to have a blacklist or whitelist for application for software. And one of the controls is utilize an exception process for non-whitelisted software that includes mitigation techniques. So it really is a maturing process. It's an enhancement. Control information flows between security domains on connected systems. A lot of people would say, a security domain would be NIPR, SIPR, and JWICs. Within your environment, if you've set up a CUI enclave, you have to control the communication between that secure side, the CUI enclave, and your typical corporate network. That would be addressing there. They want advanced training at level 4 and 5, whether it be spear phishing training or understanding TTPs and adjusting your social engineering. Additional controls do levy additional requirements on you. They aren't enhancements. They are new. So penetration testing is a level 4 control, as well as red teaming exercises. Both good ideas, even if you're not at that level. The big one, or perhaps the expensive one, is to establish a security operations center. As I note here, just because you have an IT guy doesn't mean you have a security operations center. They have to dedicate their time to provide continuous security monitoring. At level 4, I believe the SOC is required to be during business hours, and level 5 is a 24/7. Another level 5 control is to have on-call incident response who can respond virtually or physically within 24 hours. Again, those are not going to be inexpensive to maintain. A lot of the focus at level 4 and 5 is to integrate current threat intelligence into your network security program. Again, these are good ideas even if you're not required to hit level 4 and 5. There's some good information out there that you can bring in. Quite a bit of it is open source and or free. I know that DHS maintains a threat intelligence fee that you can sign up for. Many of you should be able to access DivNet and subscribe to their information. And then there's various commercial sources out there that you can subscribe to or even automate the ingestion of to get that threat intelligence into your program. A handful of more. These are a bit on the more expensive side, I guess. Employ mechanisms to sandbox or analyze executable code at the network boundary. That's going to require additional software or an appliance. Maintain a cyber threat hunting capability. design network and system security capabilities to leverage, integrate, and share indicators of compromise, develop and update required to plan for managing supply chain risk. Supply chain risk is a big one. Create, maintain, and leverage a security strategy and roadmap for organizational cybersecurity improvement. That's more that ISO level. And as you develop into the 4 and 5 maturity progression compared to capability, this will become important. One of the big things that I really liked about the CMMC is the examples they're pulling out. They promised in version 0.6 they would have level 1 and 2 examples and clarifications. They actually ended up putting out clarifications examples for part of level 3. It's the controls that don't have, that did not correspond to 171. So those 21 controls. I believe this is a level 3 control that I have here, which is code reviews of enterprise software for internal use. Software applications developed in-house for internal use, discussion point. And then the example is all in-house developed software should be reviewed by a representative who knows what they're doing using static and/or dynamic application security tools. So if you're developing software for in-house use, it has to go through some code review, and you have to have somebody that knows how to test that. Of note, how far does this go? I don't know yet. Or are they just talking about if you write something in Visual Basic for Excel, does it have to undergo code review? I don't know yet. I'm curious as to how far this goes at this point. But if you do have personnel that are writing apps and other source code that will have to be tested by somebody that's not the coder and has the experience in order to do so. One thing I wanted to address, because they gave a pretty good example, and this may not be clear to a lot of folks, I believe this is a level 2 control at this point, which is protect, physically control, and securely store system media containing federal contract information, both paper and digital. And I kind of bolded and italicized some of these. You have to ensure procedures are in place to allow individuals to check out and return media to the media library and maintain accountability for all stored media. And then the clarification, all who access FCI should follow the process for checking out and returning it. An example, you store the CD in a locked drawer and you log the FCI CD in an inventory. You also establish a procedure to check out the CD when your employees need to use it. This has not been well put into place, I would say, in industry thus far. At this point, they're really talking about having custodians for your federal contract information and for your CUI. This is very similar to how classified information can be handled. And in particular for companies that have drawings and other things they print out, this is going to be important. You have to have an inventory and it has to be maintained. All right, so valid questions. This is very similar to last month's. Who's paying for the costs associated with the program? It's an allowable cost. It always has been. They've really focused on that. They're trying to drive down the cost for the accreditation or for the assessment to fairly low, particularly for a level 1. Who's going to do the audits? This has not come out yet. This is not solidified yet. Again, the companies, they're going to be private companies doing the audits. It'll be companies that have been certified by this accreditation body, and we expect to see this occur in March. How are they going to audit all of the 300,000 companies? Per DoD, they expect it to be a 5-year rollout. I've seen certain DoD agencies or organizations who are going to start putting this on every RFI, beginning as soon as it comes out. There is going to be some pushback and there's going to be some changes. DoD expects 5 to 10 contracts that will be associated with this. And I don't know at this point whether you'll have to have the certification to bid on that contract or it will be a post-award certification. This is going to have some time to play out over the next 6 to 8 months. Where do I find out more information? Again, the DoD website is the best source of information at this point. The drafts of CMMC are hung there. They have a list of frequently asked questions. Sera-Brynn, we will certainly try to help you understand any questions or answer any questions you may have. There's also quite a few web resources out there. Some of that information is not the best, but it's out there, and there's certainly some communities of interest that are very interested in this whole problem set. Again, what do you do now? Implement 171. 171, especially level 3, is the basis of everything. And the more attention and focus you can put into implementing this, the better off you're going to be when they start doing the certifications. Again, 171 is almost all the way to level 3. The Navy is not waiting on this. I keep beating this one, but it's part of their regulations, it's part of their requirements, and they're coming. And again, if you've had a contract in the past couple of years, if you signed a contract, you've probably already said you're compliant, so you don't want to be jammed up that way. If you're not handling CUI, if you're a defense contractor, but you don't have CUI, you need to start with those 15 cybersecurity controls from the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation. It's FAR 52.204-21. Google it, it's there. You're welcome to contact us, and we'll point you in the right direction. All right, and that was pretty quick today. We're going to look at the chat. Sam, if you want to start going.
All right, got it up. So first question I have is, will level 1 be a self-attestation and not a certification? No, the government's come out, everybody will be certified at all levels, and they're now defining what's going to be in level 1 and 2 since it's not CUI. But like we mentioned, one of the things that came out on the slide deck earlier this week was level 1 is going to be FAR 52.204 TAC 21, and the 15 good cybersecurity hygiene controls that are found in that clause. So I think most folks on existing government contracts will find it in their referenced by citation section of their contracts, and it basically hand that over and work with your IT department and your ops and everybody else to get those 15 things, and then you'll meet level 1. Next one came down and said, what document is the flow model included in? That flow model slide came out of a presentation that Katie Arrington presented down in the AIA meeting in Charlottesville, or excuse me, Charleston, on the 11th, and we'll be happy to send that out to everybody who's registered. That slide's been going through modifications over the past 6 months, but it does capture the entire process to include the establishment of the accrediting body, how companies get certified in a flowchart way, and then on to how the RFPs come out, and then how the data. So you get kind of a what we call an architecture, an OV1, overview 1 level picture of the whole process. Had somebody ask if the slides are available. Yes, we'll make, I'll put those slides from Katie's last presentation, and our slides will be available to everybody, and to include this recording that we're doing today. Let's see. Have we seen anything speaking to the scope of CMMC being different than what we've seen with 800.171? Even 800.171 alpha seems to vary between language that limits scope to the realm with CUI and the entirety of the organization, looking to see if there's any clarity relative to CMC. I think this is really getting to the boundaries question of where, especially in a larger organization, may not be applicable to small businesses, but large businesses, if you have enclaves of information, and if it applies to the whole. And we've asked the question of, like, your ISO certifications are location dependent. So are they going to hold these CMMCs to locations or to certain servers or to the overall structure? And we have not seen anything to help define that. So unfortunately, it's a great question, and I'll add it to the list that we've been trying to talk to DoD about and see if we can get some clarity on the scope and if it applies to how they're planning to allow companies, larger companies, to have different enclaves, and if one can be certified for government work and the other is commercial, and keep them separate. Somebody asked again about the slides. We'll get those. How long will the certification be good for? Katie, Ms. Arrington at meetings in November was saying they were looking at a 3-year certification period, in that they haven't really figured out yet how often they're going to be visited by your auditor, but the idea being is you're going to have a relationship with your auditor. The accrediting body is looking at the audit schedule, and it's probably not going to be a once every 3-year kind of thing. It'll be kind of like what is done with the FedRAMP program, that you're actually visited once a year, where they look at a third of your controls and then any other specific things that have been highlighted as controls that need to be addressed and reviewed because of emerging threats. So the whole idea is it's not supposed to be a static process with the what they're looking at and the threats. That the relationship you build with your auditor is so that the accrediting body can send out, like I'll use my terminology, as a flash message to the auditors saying, this is something we need you to go check for right now because it's a threat to the enterprise. And I'll send it to the actual certified companies also, but that way it starts that dialogue to help address the threat as quick as possible. Okay, next question is, our impression from Katie Arrington is that certification will absolutely be required prior to award. Post-award certification will be big news and will require some sort of POAMs, correct? When did they make this change? Okay, everything I've heard, and I think Colin alluded to, he wasn't sure of, on the initial 5 to 10 companies when they're talking the very first 6 months of implementation, that there was, she had spoken once, there may be a window for people that it would be, your certification had to be completed on award versus submission of your proposal. So, but there is no post-award that they're talking about. It's post-submission and at award, so pre-award, you have to be certified. I'm just trying to think, there's one thing, because it was brought up at the accreditation board kickoff meeting when they gave their presentations, and it was actually, I think, a question, and they specifically said no. So, so you are correct. Will FedRAMP and specifically GCC High for Office 365 be included in the CMMC? My understanding is no. Different standards, different programs. Not sure how they're going to. FedRAMP is specifically, for the cloud. Actually, both those are for cloud and Office 365. I'm not sure how they're going to leverage one against the other, but they're not going to be rolled into CMMC. CMMC is going to be its own standard. Do we know how a micro business that works on sensitive programs and requires a level 4 or 5 will implement those levels cost effectively? Okay, I guess I could just say no, but no, I'm kidding. This is the exact situation when I talked with somebody from a very small company, meaning 5 people that were producing specific components for a sensitive system, and they were looking at the same thing. How are you going to be able to host a SOC if that's required, or do those kind of things? There are vendors to help you do that. There are solution sets that can be architected, so to speak, to meet the requirements. The biggest thing I think they're trying to change is get knowledge of the fact that you need to be at a level 4 or 5 is success for the DoD, so we can start locking it down, or they can start locking it down. So I think the biggest thing is to do is reach out to a company that provides services like I don't know, Colin, I'm thinking of MSSP, or I'm sure there are going to be other vendors, or even sometimes if you're a micro business and you have a prime relationship with one of the larger company, there are ways they can host you in their environment. So that was one of the things that was mentioned at one of the meetings, was talking about, go ahead.
So if you go back, and although it's a different framework, NIST 800-171B actually has a cost breakdown for various business sizes of implementing the 171B controls. Again, they're a bit different between CMMC and 171B, but that's going to give you a pretty good indication of expected cost. Things like the SOC, for a small business that needs to not spend that much money, it's going to be outsourced. Some of the other ones can be done internally without too much cost. The issue, though, with a lot of these lower cost alternatives is you get what you pay for. And typically, you'll end up making up an hour spent in personnel time managing those systems compared to going with a more expensive one. There's not a good answer right now. And I know the CMMC team, as well as DoD, are trying to come up with cost-effective solutions that's going to work at a small business level.
Yeah, that was one thing that Katie, I got back through some minutes on when the Charleston presentation was. You know, she's been saying for a long time, it's her goal is to only cost a few $1,000s to start implementing at, and she's clarified it at the level 1 level. So as we get higher, of course, it's going to cost a little bit more. But again, they're trying, as Colin said, they're trying to make it as inexpensive as possible, but security is paramount. Colin, I'm going to put this one over to you. The next one is, any thoughts on the process, maturity level certifications? The level of detail expected even for level 2 feels more mature than anticipated.
I don't think that it's changed that much over the past couple of iterations. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that the level 2 is really having policies and procedures in place. Level 1 is going to be ad hoc, and level 2, you start having those policies and procedures in place. Personally, I don't see it being unanticipated what they're expecting at level 2.
Right.
And so, Sam, I'm going to go ahead and address the third one because it goes
Okay.
with the question for the next one. This is actually in the latest version of CMMC, down in the introduction. With respect to implementation, a DIB contractor may meet a specific CMMC level for its entire enterprise network, or particular segments, or enclaves. So yes, you can.
Okay, good.
You can segment out, and segmentation, particularly if you've been around for a while, segmentation is going to be the easiest, most cost-effective way to implement these controls. Trying to do this across your enterprise is going to be difficult, time-consuming, and cultural change is going to be the biggest stumbling block for all of these things. So the more that you can isolate this, the better off you're going to be.
Okay, now the last question, was that the last one, Colin? There's a little bit part of it, but the last question is, do DoD contracts that do not process CUI still have to comply with DFARS 252, 204, 7812, or can contractors create separate enclaves for those non-CUI projects? It's kind of two separate questions. Colin just asked the idea, to answer the one about separating, creating separate enclaves, which you can do. And the other one is, sometimes they blanketly put 7012 in contracts, but what this comes down to is, so much of this is whether the government marks it as CUI for 7012. Now, FAR 52-204-21 is the one that brings up CTI, contract information, right?
Yeah, federal
and
contract.
So the if it's brought in, if you have a contract that has the clause and the government hands you something that is labeled as CUI, which, like we've mentioned last time, PII is CUI, and so is the contract information. So it depends on what you get, but it has to be marked by the government. But once that's done, if you don't receive any of that, then 7012 doesn't apply, but I bet you your contract has 52-204-21 for basic cybersecurity. So I hope that answers both those questions. Let's see. Do you have any info on when contractors will need to be scored using the assessment methodology referenced in Lord's memo in November? Will this methodology persist after CMMC is finalized? Okay, the assessment methodology is, my understanding, is going to become part of the tools the assessors will use moving forward, the new one that came out in November of 2019. So yes, I think that's going to be, is going to be in existence once CMMC is stood up as it is now. Like you can download an assessment tool off the CMMC or off the DoD webpage to help you do your own internal 7012 compliance for 800-171, the standard checks. So I think they built that memo in November. It's actually a methodology number. It's not her memo, but there's a methodology that was from November of 2019, and that will be your kind of self-inspection checklist, so to speak, to get yourself ready for your assessments. And the scoring, again, I think it's back to the earlier question about self-attestation or certification. Is your part of the process? I think the outline of that memo, if I remember correctly, was coming with your own score, which is kind of your own internal checklist before you're audited. So it's all part of that process that is still being defined by the accrediting body. So them releasing that in November was a little bit ahead of the accrediting body, but that was one of the do outs in the products that they were going to give the accrediting body to help them get out of the gate, at least at a walk, maybe not running, but at least getting, like we pointed out, some of the training guides and some of the other material so that they can get the rest of us up to speed faster. Okay, if a tier 1 vendor has no idea about CMMC, outsources their IT, but may handle CUI by providing a quote based on a distro stamped drawing from the prime, would an acceptable mitigating workaround with a printed copy and then return back to the prime suffice? Oh, this is gonna be, wow. Yeah, I don't know how specific they're, this is a TTP kind of thing. The, let's see, by providing quote based on distro stamp drawing. And this is just me talking off the cuff. This is not anybody's policy. I would think the whole idea is mitigating who has access to the information and how secure it is. That if you did it printed back and forth, the quotes. The one thing that Katie Arrington I'll use as an example is, a prime sent one of their subs a complete engineering drawings of a certain weapon system when all they needed was like 1 page out of a 1,000-page document. So the idea being, as long as you're passing only what needs to be known, and then if you take means to protect it, that's really what they want you to do. So if you think printing is the best copy, and going hard copy, that's probably gonna be the best thing for now until you get certified. But that's just my opinion. I mean, that's kind of a TTP thing that I'm not sure they're gonna get to. So let's see, even with the enclave, the rest of the network would need to be level 1. Colin, that's a you. I mean, I would say, personally, from a business perspective, the answer would be yes. I mean, level 1 is 52.204.21, which is the 15 basic good cyber hygiene controls that every company should be doing anyway. But Colin, over to you.
Yeah, and I agree with Sam. Absolutely implement those controls if you can. But no, based on the statement from the CMMC document, the enclave or the controls would only be required where the federal contract information and or the controlled unclassified information exist. So if you're able to pull all FCI and CUI into a segment, the controls would only need to be applied there, according to the CMMC draft.
Okay. And then the last question that's currently up is, are we responsible for marking CUI? None of our CUI is actually marked, but we assume it's ITAR. We assume because of ITAR markings, it is. This is the education process. Unfortunately, a lot of the contracting officers are having to go through, because they are supposed to. You are not responsible for marking CUI. The responsibility for the marking of CUI resides with the government by our contracts. If your material is not marked as CUI, but it is marked ITAR, I'm 99.99% sure ITAR is CUI, but I'd have to go back and look. The National Archives actually has a list of what is considered CUI, and there's also DoD policy instruction. But I would agree with your assessment that if it's ITAR, it probably is CUI, but that's a question you need to ask your contracting officer. That's the other part of this effort, is educating us in industry, and then also helping us to educate our customers, being the government and our contracting officers, to ask the questions going, hey, I think this is CUI. Can you tell me if it is or not so that I can adequately protect it? They want us to be educated, and of course, we want them to be educated on it too. DAU is working all kinds of on all kinds of courses to get to start implementing. There's going to be new marking instructions coming out, along with the new 5000 series acquisition regulations that are going to go from, I think it's close to 2,000 pages down to 60 or 70 pages. They're trying to streamline a lot of the processes and also provide the education with that. So I think the bottom line answer is, if you have a question, ask your KO, and if your KO doesn't know, take a look at the National Archives and then the DoD instructions. Okay, oops, somebody just popped in. As an IT services provider providing services to DoD contractors, can you share your assessment if requirements flow down to such providers? Okay, so what they came in is, if you are a business being serviced by an MSP, that's what I'm kind of reading in here, is this is an IT services provider. So if you're doing MSP, then the answer that was blatantly said at the accrediting board meeting when the government was answering is yes, the MSP has to be certified, which caused a collective gasp. But it's just the DoD is trying to batten down the hatches, so to speak, and make sure the information doesn't go anywhere. So that would flow down to providers. They'd have to be certified. Go ahead.
Tag on this, Sam. Is if you have remote access to the company you're working with, you're probably going to be at the same level that company is. If you are providing on-site services for whatever it may be, it's likely going to be at that level 1.
Right. Okay. Well, that's all the questions that are up there right now. Give everybody a couple more minutes if you want to add something else. Just want to take this time and thank Colin for taking some time to talk today. And there's a lot of stuff continuing to move. As you can tell, the flow of information, the government's getting a little bit better about it. The exciting things are happening with the accrediting board for the structure of the assessors on our side, so to speak. And with the requirements coming out, that again, you're looking at start to see the requirement in January, coming out in RFPs and RFIs in the June timeframe into September, and then you'll see the initial go on prioritized DoD projects. So it's not going to be. And one of the things I did want to point out was the 300,000 companies do not all have to be certified by October of next year. I've seen that in even some recent postings, and the DoD is emphatic that is not going to happen. And that's not true. It's going to take 5-year processes, what they're envisioning, to get everybody required to get certified. And again, that's from kind of this MSP question of, tier 1 all the way down to tier N providers that touch DoD CUI information or touch with a project are going to have to be certified if you're a DoD contractor. One thing, when Colin was talking earlier about the level 4 and level 5, and there's a lot of detail in there, right now the DoD is anticipating that's only going to be the top 1% of the 300,000 DoD contractors. So that's going to affect about 3,000 companies. But there are some good practices in there to look at, even if you're not one of the top tier kind of folks handling that level of unclassified information, to look at and practice. So, well, I've got, one just popped up. One second. Yeah, the email address, somebody asked if we could have your email address, and I think it's actually on this last slide you're looking at right now. If you just send it at info@Sera-Brynn.com. I forgot the .com on the email address. That's okay. On the slide, we'll fix that. But it's info@Sera-Brynn.com. We'll be happy to get back with you and answer any other questions you guys have. Again, we'll post this recording. We'll post Katie's presentation. And we're available if you have any other questions. Colin, back over to you.
And hopefully we can give you some help. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.